Alabama Nation, what's going on? It's your boy Kyle Henderson of BamaInsider.com. It's game week as Alabama prepares for Fresno State. Got a great show lined up for you today. We got Tony Tsoukalas of BamaInsider.com in segment 1. Segment 2, Andrew Bone, our recruiting analyst, going to break down the latest in recruiting. And in segment 3, we got Marek Warszawski of the Fresno Bee, covers the Fresno State Bulldogs. Now, as I always like to do on our Friday Drive podcast, I like to read some interesting stat lines going in. This is the first time between Alabama and Fresno State. First meeting, the Crimson Tide is 6-1 all-time against Mountain West Conference teams. Alabama is 76-11-2 all-time at home during home openers, and riding a 15-game winning streak during home openers at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Nick Saban is a perfect 10-0 in home openers at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Alabama has won their last 27 of 28 home openers at Bryant-Denny Stadium, with their last loss coming to Ole Miss in 2015. Alabama currently ranked 6th in the nation in home winning percentage with a mark of .823. Nick Saban and Alabama have beaten 65 consecutive unranked teams. Their last loss to an unranked team came back to Auburn during the 2007 season. Since 2008, Alabama has the most wins in college football. The total number of games Alabama has won is 113. Boise State in second place with 101. Last weekend, Alabama versus Florida State drew a massive crowd TV ratings wise, earning 7.3 million viewers. Remember, game time is set for Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central Time. Game will be featured on ESPN2. For Alabama, the leading passer is Jalen, who was 10 for 18 last week with 96 yards and a touchdown. Leading rusher, Damian Harris, 9 rushes for 73 yards and a touchdown. Leading receiver for Alabama, Calvin Ridley, 7 receptions, 82 yards and a touchdown. Fresno State is led by first-year head football coach Jeff Tedford, former coach at Cal, also is a graduate of Fresno State. This season 1-0, as mentioned, beat Incarnate Word in week 1, 66-0. Leading passer is Chason Virgil, who was 16 of 29, 246 yards and a touchdown. Leading rusher is Ronnie Rivers, 9 rushes for 62 yards and a touchdown. And the leading receiver is Keyshawn Johnson, 7 receptions and 120 yards. Up first on the program is Tony Tsoukalas of BamaInsider.com, our team writer. Tony, what's going on, man? How you been?
Good. It's a nice fall weather here in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, man. As we head into this first home game at Bryant-Denny Stadium, Alabama enters as a 43.5-point favorite. What are the key storylines going into this game for Alabama?
Well, I think it all boils down to just getting that depth and developing that depth. That's something that Nick Saban's talked about. You look at Alabama, they lost 4 linebackers in their opener, so they're going to be experimenting a little bit on defense, probably plugging in some guys at new places and getting some younger players the ball. Are getting some younger players some playing time actually at new places. On offense, they'll be spreading the ball out a little bit more. Of course, we saw Calvin Ridley was the only receiver to catch a ball against Florida State. So Alabama's going to want to change that moving forward and get, Robert Foster, Cam Sims the ball some, and maybe get those freshman trio of receivers and Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, and Henry Ruggs some action as well. So, there's definitely some room for growth in this game.
What was your take with DeShawn Hand yesterday, repping with outside linebacker?
Yeah, he was working. Alabama was working out of the dime Rabbits package, so I think that has a lot to do with him working with the outside linebackers. I guess in that package you could almost consider him a jack linebacker but his hand's going to be on the ground. I don't think he'll be dropping back in coverage at all. If he does do any bit of a linebacker thing, it'll still be pass rushing. So. I think that was more just Alabama getting ready for a specific package than it is for, moving him to a new position.
You think Alabama just drops a hammer this Saturday?
Yeah, I of course. I mean, I think it just gets as ugly as Alabama lets it get. Fresno State just beat Incarnate Word 66-0, but Incarnate Word's an FCS opponent and not a very great one at that. So, it's going to be a big change in competition for Fresno, and they just don't have the pieces to really put up any kind of a fight against Alabama. So this game's more about Alabama growing and developing depth than it is about any kind of competition.
I mean, you look at the injuries that Alabama suffered. I mean, obviously that's bad for any program, but is it good long term for Alabama considering that a lot of these younger guys are going to get an opportunity to play so early in the season?
I mean, maybe like long term, but it definitely hurts them this season. I mean, to lose perhaps their two best pass rushers in Christian Miller and Terrell Lewis, there's no kind of positive way to spill that. I guess the positive way you could would be the fact that it happens so early in the season, so they have time to prepare for it. But it's definitely not ideal. Um, it was a real crushing blow for Alabama.
We're talking with Tony Tsoukalas of BamaInsider.com. You can catch all the coverage back on BamaInsider.com leading up to game day as well as after game day. Tony, there's been countless threads on the message board about Jalen Hurts. What do Alabama fans want to see from him this week, and what do you think we'll see from him this weekend?
I think they want to see him stay in the pocket more and go through his progressions and make some of those downfield passes like he showed he could make with that pass to Ridley, I think 53 yards. So they don't want to see him tuck the ball and run as much. They want to see him have more pocket presence. And so I think he'll have more time Saturday, and he will be able to kind of go through some of those progressions. And I think that'll translate to the offense being a little bit more dynamic. I think you'll start seeing him spread the ball around to different receivers, and I think that's kind of what Alabama fans want to see.
Alabama now 1-0 in the season after beating Florida State, and Alabama, received nearly all the votes in both the coaches and the AP poll. I mean, it's only been 1 week, but in your opinion, what is the identity so far about this Alabama football team?
They have a really good defense. I'll say that. Despite all the injuries last week, the defense was great. You had a lot of inexperienced players stepping into big roles, and I think we touched on that just a second ago. We're going to see that growth come. And so it's your typical Alabama defense. On offense, it's really hard to tell because Florida State had such a great defense that they limited Alabama in so many ways. So I think this week you'll get to see a little bit more of what Alabama is all about on offense. And then on special teams, the kicking game's still a problem a little bit, but Alabama really showed out on special teams on the non-kicking units with a block, a forced fumble, a blocked field goal, a blocked punt, and a forced fumble. So maybe that's going to be the new, I guess, trend in Alabama football. Last year we saw the non-offensive touchdowns. Maybe this year it's all about special teams. Who knows?
There was a lot of guys who really rose up last week, and of course, the high-profile guys balled out as we expected them to. But one guy in particular, and you wrote a great story on him, is Levi Wallace, and I thought, he was just, he first of all, we got an opportunity to talk to him earlier in the week. Exceptional person. I mean, he seemed very humble. Paint a little bit of a backstory to Levi Wallace, and kind of fill us in on more about Wallace and the role he plays at Alabama.
Yeah, well, Levi was a scrawny, just a really skinny kid in high school. wasn't really recruited by anyone. Didn't have a Division I offer. Didn't even have a rivals page. He was a star on his high school team in Tucson, Arizona, but he didn't really have the bulk or the frame to play cornerback. And his dad, Walter Wallace, is from Tuscaloosa, was in the military, bounced around. That's how he ended up in Tucson. And he always wanted his son to go to Alabama. So it didn't matter if he got a scholarship. He had the GI Bill. So he was always determined that Levi was going to go there. And he basically told everyone that, my son's going to go to Alabama and he's going to play football. And I don't think a lot of people believed him at first. But, as time progressed, both him and Levi, they believed in that dream so much that they made it true. And Levi was a walk-on at Alabama, and last season was his first season on scholarship. And he's a guy that's just really grown, and now he's making plays. I think now he's a in the competition to be a starter. You know, he came in that second half in week one and really helped turn the tide of the defense. You know, Florida State was passing the ball really well to start the game, and Levi Wallace came in for Trayvon Diggs in the second half, and it really, you saw a shift in what Florida State was able to do in the passing game. So he's definitely a kid that, like you said, a very humble kid, and a kid that's going to keep his nose to the grindstone, but also a kid that could really make a difference on the field.
Saban continued to talk about injury updates. One injury that a lot of people are curious about is Josh Jacobs. Do we have a status update on him, and do we expect him to play this weekend?
You know, he'd probably be the most questionable out of, because Saban said that, you know, the other injured players, Rashawn Evans and Anthony Jennings, will be out most likely. So it's really going to come down to what Josh Jacobs can do in practice the next couple days, and if Saban wants to risk that injury. I would lean towards him not playing. Alabama certainly doesn't need him in this game, and Saban has made a point to say that he doesn't want to rush him back from that hamstring. Although if Josh Jacobs is completely fine and they feel comfortable with him, he might get a few carries just to kind of shake off the cobwebs in this game. But I definitely don't expect him to see a lot of action just because Alabama doesn't need him. They have three other backs right now. This doesn't project to be a very close game where they would need him to come in. So, you know, I think they're going to ease him into the lineup, and then by the time when they really need him, he should be 100%.
Yesterday, closing out the press conference, a reporter asked Saban if he's worth $11 million. What was your take on that, and do you think Saban is worth $11 million this season?
Yeah, you know, the question surprised a lot of people. You know, it was a national writer, so you know, I think he's just trying to get a national spin on things, and it's kind of funny. I don't know if Saban would have been as composed in his answer if one of the local beat writers had asked that question, but yeah, he might have you know, opened up a little bit of a rant on one of the local guys. But as far as his answer, I thought it was really composed too. You know, I think he answered it pretty professionally. You know, Saban said that he probably isn't worth $1 million, but he doesn't really do it for the money, so it doesn't matter. I'm sure he does a little bit for the money, but I get what he's saying. As far as I'm concerned, you know, if you look at Alabama, Saban's the reason why they're on top. He's really, you know, made the program into what he is, and you know, if you look at Alabama football, it makes a ton of money. So without Saban, is it, you know, is it as successful? No. So yeah, I mean, you could definitely. I'm not big with the money. I don't know contracts or whatever, but I would say he is worth it. I just because what he brings to the program. I mean, you can't get anything better than Nick Saban. So if you're the top at what you do, then you're going to command top dollar. So to me, it's not really that surprising that he makes that much money, just because, you know, the state of college football athletics and what Alabama's been doing.
All right, now I'm here with my good buddy Andrew Bone of BamaInsider.com, recruiting analyst. Bone, what's up, man?
Hey, what's going on, Kyle? How are you?
Man, I'm doing great. I enjoyed your recruiting Q&A on Wednesday.
Yeah, it was pretty active. You know, people are still asking questions. So, yeah, if you haven't checked it out yet, please go to the Alabama recruiting board and get on that Q&A. And yeah, if you have questions, go on there and ask. And I'll certainly answer. But you know, a lot of good questions this week, and you know, we've certainly gone on there and answered to the best of our knowledge.
Bone, Bama has 10 commitments right now. How are some of these guys faring during their high school season?
Well, it's a good, you know, good football season so far for a lot of these guys. You know, it seems like every week we're seeing crazy stats from Slade Bolden down there in Louisiana.
He's killing it. He's
having a fantastic year. I think the guys at Rivals feel pretty good about moving him up to 4 stars. You know, a lot of people kind of left him at 3 stars, and you know, once he committed to Alabama, he moved. Of course, he moved up the very next week after after he committed to Alabama. But what a lot of people don't realize is those rankings were probably finished about a week prior to his commitment to Alabama. So a lot of people don't realize that. But you know, the Rivals guys felt like he deserved to be moved up to 4 stars, and you know, he's certainly having a fantastic season. Tommy Brown out there in California is having a good year. Really, really strong start to his senior season. Trey Sanders, 2019 running back commitment, having a really good year for IMG Academy. He's having some explosive touchdown runs against national competition every week. Jalen Armour Davis, in-state defensive back, having a really good season so far. So a lot of Alabama commitments having great seasons, and it's only going to continue to get better.
We run that following the future piece every Tuesday. So if you're looking to see how these guys did each Friday night, of course, go to the recruiting board. But every Tuesday we run that feature, so Bone got you covered on that front. I know you went to the game, right, Bone, on Saturday against Florida State?
Oh yeah, I was there.
Yeah,
it was such an exciting game. It's so much fun to watch. Just different fan bases. It's almost split down the middle. You don't get a chance to see that unless you're going to an SEC championship game or a playoff game or something like that. It's really fun to see all the two different fan bases and how many fans come out and support both programs. But for this opening game, you had a lot of recruits who were there for Alabama and recruits who were there for Florida State. So both schools were able to invite recruits. Both programs also had kids on both sides who were considering both programs. So it's certainly an interesting dynamic, and there was a lot of top guys there, and I'm sure a lot of top guys were impressed with that performance by the Crimson Tide.
Speaking with Andrew Bone of BamaInsider.com, he's our recruiting analyst. Before we dive into which prospects were actually at this high-profile game last week, what was your assessment for Alabama in terms of their offensive production? I mean, the defense balled out, and Alabama's defense is going to Alabama defense. I was really impressed that they did that against Florida State. But from an offensive perspective, it seemed like the message boards were just they were lit up with a lot of criticism towards Alabama's offensive game. Do you think that was fair? And what was your assessment of Alabama's offensive attack in Week 1?
Well, I think Alabama was, they didn't really have to do a ton on offense because the defense played just so well. Alabama had some, a few explosive plays on offense, and they were able to move the ball from time to time. But I don't think they're going to face a defense like Florida State all year long. Now, I know that LSU is going to have a very salty defense. Auburn's got a very good defense. Plus, it's going to be on the road in Auburn. But Florida State has so much talent. I don't think a lot of people realize how much talent they have. There's NFL players all over that defense for Florida State, and I thought Alabama was fine, and they're going to continue to get better. It's the first game for Coach Brian Dable. Working with Jalen Hurts, so there's a lot of new parts on that offense, but they're going to be fine. I think once you kind of get into the season, you get into a rhythm, it's going to be perfectly fine. Alabama in these opening games, they really haven't shown a lot, and I think we see the same comments from subscribers. We see the same comments from local media, from national media, regarding the offense, just from just about every opening game. They're just a little bit more careful in these opening games, and I think they'll be fine. Last year, they just annihilated USC, and we haven't seen that before. We really haven't. We've seen some closer games. Alabama's been able to pull away with a 2-touchdown win at the end in some of these opening games, but it really just hadn't been just complete utter blowouts or offensive explosions, except for that USC game last year. So, I think we're going to see a lot more, throughout the season. And once, Jalen kind of gets comfortable with the offense, we're going to see we'll see a different offense, this time, later on down the season. Once we get into, October, November, and even December, it's going to be a very, very explosive offense, in my opinion.
All right, so now we've kind of divulged the game and kind of went through it. Who are some big-time targets who were at that game, and what were some of their takeaways after Alabama's 24-7 victory over Florida State?
Well, Alabama was very lucky to have some big time players there, guys who were in the 2018 class, 2019 class, and even 2020 class. You had Alabama had its top two wide receiver targets at the game: Justin Ross and Jalen Waddell. Justin Ross, the number one player in the state of Alabama. Jalen Waddell, one of the best receivers in the country from Houston, Texas. Both were in attendance. You had Emory Jones, five-star quarterback from Georgia. You had Tyson Campbell, or excuse me, not Tyson Campbell, his teammate Patrick Surtain, a five-star defensive back from South Florida. You had Nadab Joseph, Rivals 100 cornerback from South Florida. So you had a lot of elite guys in that 2018 class, and you had some 2019 guys like Clay Webb, five-star offensive lineman from Oxford High School in Alabama. You had Jalen McCullough, Rivals 100 cornerback out of Georgia. So you had some big names in that class, and then you had probably the guy who's going to be the number one quarterback, possibly even the number one overall player in the 2020 class, Harrison Bailey, the one of the best quarterbacks that I've seen. I was at a camp several months ago, and it had Emory Jones, Matt Corral, it had Trevor Lawrence, and then it had 2020 quarterback Harrison Bailey. Harrison Bailey walked away with the quarterback MVP honors, going up against three other five-star quarterbacks. So I think that says a lot about Harrison Bailey and how elite he's going to be down the road. And I think he's very, very high on Alabama early on in his recruitment. But, a lot of top names who were there, a lot of guys who walked away very impressed, especially with that Alabama defense. A lot of people didn't really know what was going to happen. Florida State has a pretty high-powered offense. They have a great receiver group, had a great quarterback in DeAndre Francois, some great running backs, and Alabama's defense really just shut them down. And I think there was a lot of players who were really impressed with that performance.
One prospect I want to get more on is Jalen Cunningham, coming back from turf toe surgery. What's the latest with him? Will Alabama give him the green light to commit? What do you think?
Well, he was just cleared this week to return to the field, so he is going to be playing in his first game on Friday night. So he's really excited about getting out there and competing. And he talked to a lot of schools this week. A lot of schools know that he's heading back to the field. He talked to Alabama, Auburn, UCLA, Ole Miss, Mississippi State. A lot of these guys are really anxious to see how he performs. He was in he was in Atlanta for the game against Florida State. Very impressed that he was watching Deron Payne throughout the night, and that's who he really looks up to and wants to really wants to be like once he gets to the next level. But right now, I think a lot of people are just really waiting to see how he performs on the field. Alabama, very, very impressed with him. They just want to see how he does, these first few games. And, if he does well, I think Alabama's going to give him the green light to commit. He certainly wants to go to Alabama, in my opinion. He grew up a big Alabama fan. He goes to all the events down in Tuscaloosa. He's gone to practices down there. He's gone to the cookout. Been down there for camps. Was there for the spring game. He's just a big Alabama fan, and that's where he wants to go. He's got really good size, really good athleticism. He's still very raw as a football player, but I think Alabama is really eager to potentially take a chance on him because he's got a lot of size that you can't coach, and he's got a lot of things that you can coach. So they really like him a lot. We'll see what happens, but if he does really well these first couple of games, Alabama will tell him, hey, you can go ahead and jump on board because they really want to get some more defensive linemen in this class. There's not a lot of big guys out there that they're involved with. There's some guys who are going to visit, but in terms of guys that they have very good chance to sign, Jalen Cunningham definitely high on that list, and I think I think at the end of the day, they'll end up taking a chance on him.
Again, we're speaking with Andrew Bone of BamaInsider.com. You can catch all his coverage back on BamaInsider.com inside the Alabama recruiting board. Bone, what's the latest on Vernon Jackson? I thought he was going to commit a couple weeks ago. I've had him on Twitter notifications. What's going on, man?
Well, what happened was Hurricane Harvey. That was that hit the state of Texas, and that really kind of put things on hold for Vernon Jackson. And as of right now, it really has not planned a new announcement. Everybody's still kind of waiting to see when he's going to redo that. But as of right now, Alabama still looks very good for him. I certainly expect him to announce for Alabama whenever he does reschedule his announcement. There's some other schools that are still in it, TCU, Texas A&M. They're still heavily recruiting him, but whenever he does announce his decision, which I expect will happen in the next, it could happen tomorrow, could happen in the next week or two. We're just kind of waiting to see when he does decide to do it. We haven't, like I said, we haven't heard when he will do it, but when he does, I expect him to announce for Alabama.
Now we're joined by Marek Warszawski of the Fresno Bee. He covers the Fresno State Bulldogs. So why don't we just open this with giving me a little background on this Fresno State team. I know that last year they were 1-11 on the season, but off to a good start early on against Incarnate Word. Can you kind of just paint the backstory, because I know they had a new coach step in. So kind of give us a backstory to the Bulldogs.
Well, I don't know how far back you want me to go, Kyle, but most if college football fans, if they think of Fresno State, if they think of the Bulldogs at all, they probably recall some of the days under Pat Hill in the early to mid 2000s when the Bulldogs had some kind of good national runs. There were a couple of years where they beat some Power 5 conference teams. We weren't calling them back then. We called them BCS conference teams. But like, for example, 2001 when the Bulldogs beat and these teams were all ranked at the time, Colorado, Oregon State, and Wisconsin in back-to-back weeks, and rose up to number 8 in the country before losing. A few years later, they went on the road and beat Washington and Kansas State and got up in the national rankings before losing. So it's kind of a program that, at least historically, has given bigger teams a challenge and sometimes occasionally beating them, but that hasn't been the case lately. Certainly not in the last couple of years. Ever since Derek Carr graduated, now the Raiders quarterback, in 2013, the program has been on a steep decline. In 2015, they slumped to 3-9. Then last year, were 1-11, which was the worst record in school history. And that led to the firing of Coach Tim DeRuyter, who had success early with Derek Carr, his quarterback, and Devontae Adams, wide receiver. Funny how good you can be when you have NFL talent on your roster. But that hasn't been the case the last couple of years, and the program has really slumped. And to the point when Jeff Tedford came in, he was kind of hired toward the end of last season, and he kind of remarked that looking at the talent level, he kind of looked like a program that was on probation. That was his quote. So things have really, really dropped off here. And so kind of right now, Fresno State is in year one of the rebuild. I think they're going to be a little bit better than last year, but probably not a team that's going to be, well, certainly not competing for a conference title and probably not even going to a bowl game, but should be better than 1-11. And we saw last week 66-0. I mean, they were playing Incarnate Word, which is a kind of a low-level FCS team, but it was still a pretty lopsided score. So that gave some people reason to be encouraged. But of course, everyone's strongly discouraged by by Saturday, and of course, the following week the Bulldogs play at Washington. So that's probably as tough a consecutive week schedule as anyone in the country has.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Alabama, then Washington. My goodness. Earlier in the week, during Nick Saban's press conference, he mentioned Jeff Tedford and the respect that he has for him as a coach. What's the excitement around Jeff Tedford? I know that he had some success when he was at Cal. So can you talk about the excitement that surrounds having a quality coach like that step in?
Yeah, yes, there's definitely a Coach Tedford. He has a pretty strong track record of developing quarterbacks. offensive court. Well, at Fresno State, he kind of developed Billy Volek, who played for a long time in the NFL, and recruited David Carr, Derek's older brother. He never coached him. And he went to Oregon and had success with guys like Achilles Smith and Joey Harrington. Then he became head coach at Cal. Of course, his claim to fame there is discovering Aaron Rodgers. That was probably obviously the number one guy that he had at Cal, although he had, other Kyle Bowler, another high first-round pick that right when he got there, he kind of turned around. So that's Tedford's background is kind of as a quarterback guru and a quarterback coach, which is a good thing, and people are excited about that. But also, I think, too, another bigger factor, at least out here in Fresno, is that, Coach Tedford is a former Fresno State Bulldog. He played here. There's a lot of, parochialism, regionalism around here. People like to have coaches that, were former players. And then a bigger part of it even, though, is that there's back to being a re-emphasis on the Valley. Out here in Fresno, we're kind of in the middle of California, but we're about 150 to 200 miles away from Southern California and that great recruiting area. And really, Fresno State should not have talent issues. There's enough talent in the Valley, our surrounding counties, and in Southern California, and then a little in the Bay Area and Sacramento, that filling up the roster with talent should not be a problem. Well, the last coaching staff kind of had a lot of Texas connections, and they kind of swayed recruiting a little more toward Texas and some of the southern states, and really weren't paying enough attention to some of the local prospects around here in the Valley, and people didn't like that, and it's actually came back to burn them. For example, Josh Allen, who everyone thinks is a top high first-round pick, is now at the University of Wyoming. He grew up in a little town about 30 miles from Fresno, grew up a huge Fresno State fan, wanted to come here, but the coaches didn't recruit him because they didn't think he was big enough. Well, now he's 6'5" and 230 pounds, and so they look pretty stupid. So there's been a few instances like that really kind of harpooned the last coaching staff. So a big part of Tedford is coming back, is kind of re-emphasizing the Valley. There's been a few transfers from Pac-12 schools that kind of have come back. A couple of them are sitting out, but then, of course, Marcus McMarion, backup quarterback, on this team's roster, he was a recent transfer from Oregon State, and he grew up about 50 miles from Fresno. So, again, I think a big part of Tedford is, yes, he's a good offensive coach, but, again, I think he understands a little bit the formula a little bit better to be successful here, especially in regard to local and in-state recruiting.
Now, Alabama, obviously number one in the country, and by a big margin. It seems like early on in the coaches poll as well as the AP poll. What was Tedford's take earlier on in the week when you visited with him about Alabama? Now, I know that everybody has such a high standard for Alabama, but it also comes with Nick Saban, who's one of the best in the business. What was Tedford saying when taking on this game with Alabama this weekend?
Yeah, he said all the right things. All the respect for Alabama, for their coaches, for their players, and how well the coaches get players to play hard. He made the point that there's a lot of teams that have great players, but they don't always play well or play to the schemes or play with great effort that Alabama does. So, he was extremely complimentary. How can you not be? When you just look at Alabama and, the recent track record, it is incredible. Of course, being a football coach that he is, he's gonna prepare his team. He clings to the, we don't care who we're facing mindset. It's all about us. So publicly he's saying those things. He's not a guy that's gonna at least publicly, cower in the face of Alabama. I don't know what they're saying behind closed doors. At least, but out front, he's talking up his team and his team's chances. Although obviously it's a huge obstacle, and he's quite aware of that. But again, he's trying to do his best not to prepare his players for the environment and the level of competition they're going to face. Fresno State has played in some rough environments the last couple of years. 2 years ago, a lot of these players were played at Ole Miss. I think that's the Ole Miss team that beat Alabama, correct, with all that talent that kind of imploded. But I think that score was
right.
73-21, so they were in Oxford. Jason Virgil played in that game. He actually got hurt. Actually, no, it was the following week he got hurt, but he actually played a few quarters in that game. And then last year they went to Nebraska, probably not the same level, but a good environment, and they lost, I think, 43-10. So again, new coaching staff, so new attitude, but at least in year one of the rebuild, probably going to be same results. But they're saying all the right things about Alabama, and they're not going to say anything to upset Alabama. Obviously, that would be highly kind of stupid. So they have a lot of respect for Alabama, and really, who doesn't? And this game is being played because Fresno State's getting paid $1.4 million to go there, and that's really the only reason. Tedford doesn't get into that stuff, but that's kind of the bottom line.
That's a nice payday.
That's a nice paycheck, yeah.
Yeah.
And Fresno State, and next week they're getting Washington for $1 million. So, it's
2.5 in back-to-back weeks.
2.4 in 2 weeks. Yeah. Now again, this is Fresno State is not a Group of 5 program. They don't get TV money this year. Most college programs are cutting sports. Fresno State has actually added wrestling and women's water polo that go live in November. So that's more than $1 million that the athletic director has to find. He's giving out full cost of tuition stipends to all the sports, which is something that most people on this level aren't doing. That's something that maybe SEC schools do, but not Mountain West schools. And then, of course, he's having to pay. He's got 3 more years of Tim DeRuyter to pay off his contract, while also paying Jeff Tedford pretty hefty amount for this level too. So he's got expenses and bills to pay, all over the place. But unfortunately, he puts his football team in a kind of a bad position.
Yeah, always bills to pay, right? No matter how much you bring in, there's always bills to pay.
Right.
As we look at this Fresno State team, last week they put up 613 yards of offense. And like you mentioned earlier, it was against Incarnate, where it's still impressive, though. I mean, my goodness, it's only almost 700 yards. Jason Virgil, quarterback last week, 16 for 29, 246 yards and a touchdown. Talk about his play. And you mentioned earlier that Tedford works well with quarterbacks. What type of quarterback is Jason, and how has he progressed throughout the years?
Well, Jason's one of those guys that he's from Texas, right? He's one of the old coaching staff when they emphasized Texas recruiting. One of the prizes, one of the plums they came away with is Jason Virgil, who, has a lot of success at a pretty big school in the Dallas area. He actually had some interest, I think, it may have been from Big 12 and an SEC school at the end. They kind of showed interest late. He came to Fresno State anyway. He, though, I think was recruited he's a better fit for the old kind of spread offense that they were running. Maybe, not that that's changed a whole lot, but, he got a lot of experience early in his career. He hasn't really been able to stay healthy, and really for him, consistency has been, the main bugaboo. I wouldn't call him a polished passer. There was some instances last week where he's the kind of guy that'll miss the easy, wide open throws that should net, 5 to 7 of the easiest yards, and then he'll avoid a sack and then make a throw on the move that you think, wow, So it's kind of a little bit frustrating for fans to watch him because of that kind of inconsistency, missing easy throws and then making plays when they really aren't there that kind of open your eyes a little bit. But he's not a big guy. He's listed at 6'1", 192 pounds. Durability has been an issue for him. He's definitely a team leader, and the people around here respect him. And he's only listed as a sophomore because he had a medical. He came in really early as one of those early enrollee freshmen, so he's been in the program for a while. But again, he hasn't really established himself as the clear-cut starter, and he hasn't really proven that he can stay healthy a whole season. Last year, he got banged up in the Nebraska opener and continued to play, but really kind of hurt his effectiveness a little bit. The big news during training camp around here was Marcus McMarion, a kid from Dinuba, which is a little town about 50 miles from Fresno that was in Oregon State the last couple of years. He transferred in as a graduate transfer, and he's one of those guys that graduated from Oregon State in 3 years, so he actually has 2 years of eligibility left. And as soon as McMarion came in, the competition at quarterback, obviously elevated. The only other guy really in competition was a JC transfer. And, right now, Jason Virgil is still the starter. McMarion he missed, I believe, about the first week of camp, so he's still catching up a little bit. But he was pretty impressive last week, although when he came in, the score was 43-0. I would expect both quarterbacks to play on Saturday, although Chasen will be the starter, and maybe this time the score will be 43-0 the opposite way when McMarion gets in. But both of them will play, and at some point I wouldn't be surprised if McMarion becomes the starter. But that's a battle that I think is going to be ongoing. But right now, Jason Virgil is still the guy, but they're not completely settled on him yet.
Any other impact players on the offensive side of the ball? I noticed that Ronnie Rivers last week ran for 9 rushes, 62 yards, and a touchdown. Leading receiver looks like Keyshawn Johnson with 7 receptions for 120 yards.
Fresno State's strongest position group, probably on the whole team, is wide receiver. Keyshawn Johnson is a guy who definitely jumps out of the tape. He's very talented, 6'2", 202-pound guy with speed and elusiveness. A guy that definitely has NFL talent, and and we're seeing him kind of blossom a little bit. He's gotten better every year, and he's probably maybe their standout offensive player. And then they have a couple other receivers that have a lot of experience and a lot of speed. Jameer Jordan is one. Darian Grimm, who kind of came in here, he was a kid that was a transfer from Nebraska by way of a junior college out here. But he's been really impressive. Jameer Jordan was a playmaker for them last year. Damari Scott is a good possession receiver. So definitely, wide receivers is the strength. Of course, quarterbacking hasn't been. So, how good your wide receivers are, if your quarterback can't get them the ball, it's kind of limited. So that's been the limiting factor for the Bulldogs. As far as running back go, Ronnie Rivers, he is the son of a former Fresno State and former NFL running back named Ron Rivers, and he made he started as a true freshman, which was kind of impressive. He really has impressed the coaches during camp. But then Josh Hokett, number 33, he is the kind of the fullback. They'll get some carries around the goal line, and then last week he threw a 65-yard option pass for a touchdown that I'm sure they won't show again because Alabama be looking for it after they saw it. But those are kind of the standouts. Weakness has been the line play, right? That's been the real weakness of both lines. Have been the weakness for the last couple of years of this program. There's 4 returning starters on the offensive line, but I'm not, that may or may not be a good thing, Ryan. And what's kind of funny is that the coaches talk up the 5th guy, the one guy who didn't start last year, or the left guard, Natane Mute. He's considered the best lineman of the whole group. So I'm not sure what that says, that the 4 returning starters aren't as good as this kid who hasn't even played yet. So so anyway, line has definitely been, the kind of the issue.
Kind of
continue to be.
Closing out, if you can, highlight the defense and as well as the special teams play. I noticed last week only 125 yards, and then on special teams it looks like field goals was 2 for 2.
Yeah, well, Fresno State was leading the nation in rushing defense after 1 week. Something tells me that's not going to be the same thing going into week 2, right? Again, defensive line, new coaches here. Fresno State's playing this kind of a hybrid 4-3 defense where they have their defensive ends, as I'm sure the Alabama coaches saw on film, were up in 2-point stances, which is a little bit unusual. And they're going to switch guys around. They're going to give people different looks that you may not see all the time. The defensive coordinator, Orlando Steinauer, he spent his entire career in the CFL, in Canada, and he had a reputation as a great coordinator up there and probably a future CFL head coach. Jeff Tedford spent a little time in Canada. That's where he got to know Coach Steinauer. But definitely he's going to be giving a little different look than what people are used to. Again, I'm not so sure how effective it's going to be against Alabama. I think the strength of the defense, we saw last week, middle linebacker Jeffrey Allison, only a sophomore, but he really had a really strong game against Incarnate Word. I think that he may end up being one of the best players on the defense. And also James Bailey, kind of a weak side linebacker, kind of one of those safety linebacker hybrid guys, number 7. Those are probably their 2 best players. Again, secondary's okay. They've got, a couple experienced guys there, including a cornerback who started some games for UCLA. But yeah, mostly in the interior line, that's, where the question marks are. They don't have any 300-pounders listed. One guy at 295, another at 298, so close. But, that'll be probably the big issue. Alabama, are they going to even have to pass the ball on Saturday, or they're just going to be able to run at will on Fresno State.
All right, good stuff. I appreciate your time today. That's Marek Warszawski. Did I get it right? Marek?
Good job. Yep, you did good.
We appreciate your time, and you're the columnist of the Fresno Bee. I know you're not coming over to Tuscaloosa, but next time you're anywhere in the South, please, contact one of us from Rivals.com and ask about the food. I'm kind of a transplant myself. I recently moved from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Tuscaloosa, so and I've been out to California many, many times. In fact, I used to live out in Los Angeles. So appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, and we'll see what the outcome is on Saturday.
Well, I think we know what the outcome's going to be, Kyle. I think it's just what the score is going to be, and of course, I'm sure there's some Bama fans interested in the spread too. Thanks for having me on, Kyle. Have a great day.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, that's all we got on the BamaInsider.com podcast. From Tuscaloosa, Alabama, this is Kyle Henderson. Remember, you can download or subscribe to any of our podcasts via iTunes or Google Play. Just search for the BamaInsider.com podcast. Hope you have a great week, too. Catch all the action back on BamaInsider.com.